Okay, hey everyone, thanks for coming. As you know, my name's Toby. I'm from Queen Mary University of London, and if you told me this time last year I'd be celebrating my birthday by coming across the pond to give a talk about my research, I don't know what I would have told you. But I am. Thank you. I've just realised I've left the clicker. That's great. Always good to make sure. Okay, right, where were we? So, yes, I am studying tabletop games. Been a huge fan of TTRPGs, D&D in particular, so let's get into it. Just a quick show of hands here. How many of you have actually played any of these games on screen here? Okay, that's kind of to be expected from an AI conference, I suppose. But you'll understand the importance of what a game master is and how they actually necessary for controlling the game. So they're very important, and the reasons why I'm researching them is that they are both cooperative and competitive with the rest of the players. Usually at the same time, they'll have to control a couple of the allies and the enemies that the players are up against. Which means that it's quite interesting the role they have to play compared to the rest of the players, and that they're often having to be both the referee and the narrator of the game in order to keep the play going. As a result, due to the nature of TTRPGs, it can be quite difficult for an AI agent to predict the end game result from any given game state, usually because the optimal strategy might not be the most narratively satisfying one. The players are here to have fun, there is no objective win state, the game continues as long as people are enjoying themselves. So it makes quite an interesting topic for studying the research in that regard. So we constructed a roadmap of how we would go about creating an AI agent for the role of Game Master. We considered the various different stepping stones and areas that we think would be necessary for consideration. But in order to actually do that, to get anywhere, we need to teach it how to actually play the game in the first place. So, how do you want to do this? We did this by implementing the game Descent: Journeys in the Dark, 2nd edition, into the tabletop games framework, it's a virtual environment. Descent itself is an Descent itself, got ahead of myself, is an asymmetrical fantasy board game, 2 to 5 players, where one player takes the role of the Overlord, which is like this evil game master. They're not here to help the players win, they are objectively to defeat the heroes. The other players take on the team of heroes, trying to overcome the obstacles available. Descent isn't so much a TTRPG in the traditional sense. There isn't really any roleplay to it, but when you get down to it, it is basically just a watered-down Dungeons and Dragons at the end of the day, so it's a simpler environment to work with to begin with. So for our particular implementation, we've done the first quest of the base game campaign. Key things to take in mind here, the heroes have 4 different archetypes they can choose from, color-coded for your convenience here. And the Overlord controls 2 different monster types, Goblin Archers at the top there, which are these small, scraggly little ranged units which just get everywhere, and then the Barghest, which are these giant wolf-like monsters that are very strong in melee. So here you can see a demonstration of the game in progress. This is with 5 Monte Carlo tree search agents going on. We have had to accelerate it because even with the optimized state we use it, it takes a long time. About 20 seconds per turn, so it's about ×4 sped up, I believe. You can see the heroes taking their actions, taking positions to take care of the monsters, moving up around the board to prevent them from getting anywhere. I think that's that. So here you can see an example of what the character stats look like in the physical board game and how we interpreted it in the environment. So key thing to note is that all of the heroes have their own unique hero ability and heroic feat, which are unique to that character, which influence how the game plays through. So each heroes who share the same archetype might play completely differently. For the quest itself, there are 3 victory conditions that one can be met to determine. We introduced a 4th one, which I'll get to in a bit. For the heroes to win, they just need to defeat all of the Barghest monsters, which spawn up in square 4A. The Overlord, on the other hand, they can just defeat all of the heroes at once, or, for this quest specifically, get sufficient fatigue tokens, as they're called, by having the goblins reach down to the score zone of 9A. If the goblins are left alone long enough, the Overlord will win. For the sake of our agents, we introduced a timeout condition, which if 20 full turns have passed without either side winning, we assign a loss to both of them. Because realistically, if you're playing this game and you've reached 20 turns, you're either purposefully avoiding winning the game, or you're just incredibly unlucky. So, just a quick overview of the action space size. Here's an example of what a particular turn might look like. Each hero gets 2 action points to take their turns. Certain things like get movement points counts as an action point. Things like individual movements do not count. The state space itself, the game is stochastic because of the high number of dice rolls involved. But in our current implementation, everything that is in the game is fully observable to all the agents. So they can see exactly what the monster stats are, what abilities are on cooldown, what dice are about to be rolled, and then what the results of each dice roll is going to be. So, moving on to how we did the testing. We did some preliminary tests just to make sure the environment was up and running. So we use 3 various agents. Random, which just takes whatever legal action it can get. One step look ahead, which is greedy search, just grabs the first best option it can find. And Monte Carlo tree search, which, as I'm sure you're familiar with, uses decision trees to find out what options are the best ones available. For the heroes and the Overlord, we both use the same heuristic values for both One Step Look Ahead and Monte Carlo Tree Search. This is because although Descent is an asymmetric game in nature, it's very much a tug of war in that the better your opponent is, the closer your opponent is to winning, the closer you are to losing. So obviously just flipping it on its head there. So the better the heroes are doing, the worse the Overlord's doing, and vice versa. So we did 6,000 self-play matches originally, split up into the various groups here. First thing you'll notice is that there's a high likelihood of the Overlord winning, which is something that surprised us initially when we were doing this. Notably, the more players you introduce, the lower the likelihood the heroes winning are. This is primarily because as more heroes are introduced into the game, the number of monsters available also increases to match. So we found with this quest, because there's more goblins running around, the heroes have more monsters to kill, and the Overlord can just slip one through quicker. Also, you notice, random does not get very many outcomes that well. Mostly it's just timeouts, which, random can't get any actual good progress, which is something we discovered earlier on. So then we did some round-robin matches, which we then pitted the agents against each other, so you changing the types each one. 9 different possible combinations available here. Again, you'll notice random not very good at this. Didn't get a single win when it was playing as the heroes. Always the Overlord won or had high timeouts. When the other agents were, it was a bit more balanced, but key note that MCTS playing as the heroes versus Osler as the Overlord. Interestingly, in the experiments we did, not a single match won by the heroes. One Step Look Ahead won as the Overlord in all the games we did. Which is something very confusing for us, which we did try and look in, and I'll explain later. So there were 2 key takeaways from all of those experiments we did. One, the player results from human tests we did showed that the heroes are more likely to win, which I suppose makes sense because it's the tutorial campaign session, really. So it's just an interesting how people playing with the physical board game differ with our current implementation, and perhaps the agents have difficulty communicating with each other for strategies, whereas humans can just say, oh, I'm going to go this way, you should go that way, and then plan from that. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, random is useless. Yeah, random just doesn't do anything really successful here. So for the rest of the experiment, we were basically only looking at MCTS and One Step Look Ahead. So, on to behavior analysis. We've got some heat maps of how the agents tended to end their turns everywhere. So you can see MCTS, a lot of attention up here in square 4A, because that's where the Barghest spawn, and then the goblins respawn when they've been defeated. So the heroes, if they're trying to win, want to focus a lot on that. One step look ahead, instead just rushing straight towards the score zone, and random, just basically wherever the monsters were, just everyone running around aimlessly. We did then look at how the figures themselves interacted with each other. So you can see here the attacks and how many times they were defeated each game. It's worth noting that because of the nature of one step look ahead, the games were a lot quicker than MCTS. In comparison, it was about, I think, 11 turns on average versus only 4 turns on average, which was quite interesting. Most one you want to look for is the goblins. This is particularly highlighted in that MCTS, the goblins will actually try and attack the heroes as they come down to try and prevent them from killing the Barghest, whereas Osler just runs straight towards the end goal. And particular, on the other hand, MCTS, the heroes will try and defeat the goblins, whereas once they look ahead, they're just left completely in the dust. So we can then sort of theorize just how some of the agents might be playing this. So MCTS, as the heroes, would be like, oh, we're going to try and cover all of our bases, spread ourselves out, be a bit more tactical here, try and kill the Barghest while stopping the goblins from achieving anything. Osler, on the other hand, they just Zerg rushed. They just completely ignore the heroes and run straight towards the end goal. Which, when you got to the one-step look-ahead mirror matches, they did exactly the same thing. The heroes completely ignored the goblins, ran straight towards the Barghest, and the mirror matches just basically came down to how lucky are the heroes at killing the Barghest? Can they get enough attacks in before the goblins are completely left untouched? So, lastly, we did have a look at how some of the heroes synergize with each other and how the agents played them. We noticed that the most successful heroes tend to be the ones who had high utility values, particularly good teamwork and movement options. So the best 3 here ended up having high movement options, or being able to give their teammates extra movement as well. Whereas the least successful ended up being ones who had more sort of selfish, in a sense, hero actions and abilities. So they couldn't support their team much. We then looked at the heroes individually, and the most successful hero was one who had high utility values and such, high movement. The least successful, on the other hand, had to be her counterpart, the other healer, which is not a bad character in its own right, poor Averick, but compared to Astrian, he just has not as much support options. He is very much more based on healing allies rather than disrupting the monsters, which meant that because you can't deploy both healers in the same match, if you were picking Averick, you weren't picking Astrian. So you had a high opportunity cost from there in itself. It's important for the hero as a game master to consider how your players are actually enjoying the characters, and whether or not, if one's overpowered or underpowered or such, and being able to adjust how you're approaching the challenges as you go through. So it's something just to keep in mind as a game master, and something that we're going to consider for the future. So, thank you for staying with me this long. To conclude, we've created the D2E virtual environment within TAG and done some preliminary experiments with the agents and found that random actions are completely useless. Do not bother with that. MCTS tends to take more sort of a grizzled veteran approach of considering every option available, whereas one step look ahead we sort of theorize would be a bit more of a sort of a starry-eyed newcomer who thinks, oh, I'm just going to take the easiest path to victory. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then we considered some of the tactics that the heroes and the overlords have taken for their figures with each of the agents and seeing how that goes. For the future, we're looking to further expand the Game Master role for the AI agents, see how that goes. Particularly wanting to get perhaps some narrative generation involved in it to be able to do some of the role play that you would expect in a TTRPG, to adapt Descent a little bit into sort of more Dungeons and Dragons in a sense. So what I've started doing for my research currently is I'm looking to do what I'm dubbing DM Bench, which is an LMM benchmark test series, and hoping to actually get some human AI playtests within D2E to actually get the agents working together with human players and see how that goes. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please do, and I'll be here all day.